Hi there, and a big welcome to this BlueVen webinar. So in this session today, we're going to be diving into different customer segmentation models and hopefully leaving you with the framework to understand more about your customers and ultimately elevate the customer experience. I can see we've got a great turnout today, so good to see some familiar faces and some new faces here. If you haven't been on one of our Bright Talk sessions before, then it's good to note that you can catch up on all of our past webinars, any upcoming webinars that we've got on our Bright Talk profile. All you need to do is search for BlueVen in the top bar and you'll be able to see all of our content. So my name is Jen. I'm on the marketing team here at BlueVen. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for any questions that come through. So if you think of anything throughout the session, please fire them over to us and we'll try and get to as many as we can at the end. We have Matt Diamond, who's one of our consultants at BlueVen, presenting for us here today. Hi Matt, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi Jen, hi everybody.
So yeah, that's all from me, and we're going to dive into the content. It should take about 30 to 40 minutes. And yeah, we hope you find it beneficial. Thanks very much for joining us. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to really kick off today's session around segmentation by actually beginning with a question. What are we trying to achieve through segmentation of our customer base? Well, in short, what we're trying to do is to take a group who share one thing in common. They have a relationship with or an interest in our business or our products, and then divide them into smaller, more manageable groups where the number of common attributes that they share is a lot higher. So the reason for this is to help us deliver upon the idea of the right message in the right place at the right time. And we can articulate the same in many ways: personalization, one-to-one customer messaging, hyper-personalization, market optimization, all of these different ways that we can classify this. But it all essentially means the same thing: dividing up our customers to create those segments and then being able to engage with those segments with the most appropriate language and the most appropriate message through the best channel at the most relevant time. But before we dive into the details of segmentation, I want to spend a few minutes talking about the variety of data sources and data types that we have at our disposal when we're looking to actually segment and explore our customer base in some detail. So firstly, talking about data types, I'm not going to spend loads of time going to the minutiae of each individual data type or every data point that we can capture. But saying that, we do need to be aware where our data has come from. And that really has a major effect on how we actually use that data when we're actually segmenting and exploring our customer base. So what are the types of data that we've got at our disposal? Well, broadly speaking, it's three types. So we'll start with the first here. We'll start with our first-party data. This is the data that we own. So it's free to us, it's highly accurate, and it's the cornerstone of everything that we know about our customer base. And this is where we can really start to use that data to manage things like personalization of message and personalization of offer, and do that in the most accurate way, using the best channels to communicate with the individual customer while respecting their preferences and ensuring our own legal compliance as well. But at the other end of the spectrum, we've got third-party data. Now, typically this is about adding publicly available attributes to our first-party data, such as demographic enhancements as a basic example. Many businesses also actually choose to use third-party data as well as a way to increase their reach as part of an acquisition strategy. But the issue here is that some third-party data sources tend to involve a slightly higher margin for error. Others, with their government data pools, tend to be a lot more accurate. So we do have to be aware that there is this accuracy level that we need to have a trade-off between, and manage that trade-off in terms of reaching new customers and being able to actively and accurately segment those customers and do that in the right way and avoid any sort of negative brand experience for those individuals. It's also worth saying here that in my experience, many companies and brands, they're looking at making a pivot away from heavy reliance on third-party data. A lot of that's to do with the accuracy issue that we've just spoken about, but also because of the sort of more modern wave of data compliance legislation that's emerged over the last few years, GDPR, CCPA, etc. But that's definitely a topic for another day, but something I did just want to bring up at this stage. But then what do we have in the middle here then? Well, between our first and our third-party data, we have second-party data. Essentially, it's first-party data from another organisation that they can legally sell to us, but that we actually end up having to pay for. So it has all of that granularity we would expect, but there might be some things missing because they're not allowed to trade that with us. But the big thing to consider here is cost as well. So you're going to probably pay more for the cost of this data, and that's not necessarily feasible for certain organisations as well. So with these three sort of core data types, we've got to understand that working with data is all just about not just understanding where the data has come from, and therefore how trustworthy and how accurate it is, but also about understanding the types of the data that we're collecting and how we're using that data. And more importantly, if there are any gaps in that data foundation as well. So by identifying these different data types and gaps, we have that clearer picture of how we can bring all of that data, those different data points together as part of our segmentation approach. So with that said, let's take a look at some of these individual data types in a little bit more detail. So I want to start off today by taking a look at the idea of demographic data. Now, the use of demographic data, I think it's fair to say, it's pretty much the most common way to segment our customer and prospect basis. The idea of demographic data, we can capture it not only through our own first-party data, but we can also acquire that, as I've already mentioned, through third-party data relationships. And this is great because it falls into really easily recognized and really easily classifiable categories. And the fact that demographic data is statistical by definition means that everyone can be asked the same question and a variety of answers, obviously within a certain scope, can be returned. And that really allows us as users of that data to classify and group people based on the differences and the commonalities in those individual answers. If we're looking at examples of demographic data, we'd be looking at attributes such as gender, age, family status, occupation, education, nationality, income, all of those kinds of things. But many of these different data points are things that you get asked about when you're going through a passport or a visa application or as part of a national census, for example. But a key point to make when we're using demographic data is the relevance of the data points. It's going to vary significantly based on our vertical and our specific product offering. There's a couple of simple examples then. In certain retail circumstances, and I'll stress the certain element in this, variations in things such as religion or nationality or education are going to have a less of a link to the products that people purchase, especially in the case of certain items of footwear, sportswear, clothing, for example. Not necessarily true in all examples, but that is there as well. But this same example can also be seen to even greater effect when we think about things such as catering and hospitality businesses as well. Those same demographic attributes I just mentioned, they're going to have a greatly reduced impact on marketing as you're catering for one of the basic drives of humanity. We all want to eat and we all want to drink. And that really, those demographic pieces of information are going to have less of a bearing upon whether a customer will purchase from you or not. It's also worth noting that these data types alone, not just demographic data, all of these individual data types we'll be talking about today, they also form a point of segmentation on their own. We can take a simple example using just demographic data. We could segment our customers based upon whether they're male or female, or whether they're parents or whether they don't have kids. But the big thing here is that by segmenting using only a single type of data, we are conducting a very basic form of segmentation. But that segmentation essentially forms the basis for the more advanced approaches that we'll cover a little bit later on today as well. So taking this forward then, while demographic data itself gives us a baseline of information necessary to really understand our customers, we can't really ignore behavioural data either. It's this behavioural data that allows us to move beyond hard and fast facts about the individual into their motivations, start to understand their feelings and their attitudes in relation to the choices they make in their life, and then more importantly in our business and marketing context in relation to us, our products and our services. So when we think about behavioural data, we can think about things like the benefits that customers are looking for from a product. We can think about whether they've previously made purchases, how often they need the product or how regularly they use the product. Are they ready to buy something right now? How loyal are they towards your brand? When did they last shop with you, for example? So with all of this information in mind, we can start to deliver on the idea of the right message and offer for the right customer. We can avoid telling loyal customers the basic information about our brands and our products, but in turn provide that same information to new customers or prospects who are earlier in their relationship life cycle with our brand and our offering. So taking this a step further again then, building upon our understanding of our customers, we can start to actually add geographic data into the mix as well. Now, some businesses I've worked with choose to actually combine geographic data with demographic data from the outset due to the obvious link between the two different data types. But I've chosen to break this out as part of today's session. This geographic data does provide some fairly nuanced but broad insight into our customers and their specific needs as well, and also can help to really inform the way that we interact with them. Now, it's an obvious thing to say that individuals from different physical locations around the globe have different needs, but the subtlety of those needs and how they may change as factors such as the weather changes can also be overlooked as well. So an example of this from my time I spent working in retail would not just be the types of products that are being purchased. So let's just say, looking at the season here at the moment, let's take jackets and coats as an example due to this current time of year. But also look at the nuances of those purchases as well can be affected by geographic data. The weather outside, in my experience, always had a major effect. Simply speaking, if it was cold, insulation and warmth were a priority. Whereas if it was raining, then waterproofing and being dry was always the priority. But obviously with all these kinds of purchases, while things like intended use and lifestyle and colour preference and sizing always came into play, a lot of the time the raw fact of location and weather played a key part in purchasing decisions. And believe it or not, I actually saw customers who actually look outside and say, well, actually it's raining, so I'll buy a waterproof today. When all of those other factors were a little bit too close to call. So what we can see here, with weather is the fact that it drives people's choices across other industries as well. People from colder climates, broadly speaking, tend to book holidays to warmer, sunnier locations. And people choose where they want to exercise, whether that's indoors, whether that's outdoors, the types of exercise they want to do. And that can be very dependent upon the season or their physical location. And that in turn will have an effect on the type of sports kit or recreation kit they're actually purchasing and how often they make those purchases as well. So moving on from physical surroundings now and looking at technographics, we're really entering that sort of digital and technological realm of our existence as a whole. Now, initially more of a data type used by B2B marketers, where understanding a business's technology stack is a key element of their segmentation approach. We're starting to see technographics being used more and more in a B2C marketing perspective as well. And it's really about understanding the choices that users make around the technologies that they use within their daily lives. We can see this through people's choices of personal devices, phones, tablets, laptops, games consoles, TVs, smart speakers, etc. But these technology choices come to the fore for businesses that really sell complementary products and services that are based upon those devices and those technologies. Think about everything from the simple phone case, for example, through to handbags with the right size pockets, to headphones with the right types of connectivity, laptop stands, audio-visual equipment, charging cables. The list just goes on and on. And we even see a type of segmentation when we think about the way our children interact with one another in their social group and the conversations that they have as part of that group about the latest phone, the latest app, the latest online game, all of those technological elements feeding into how they're actually subdividing their social network. But like it or not, technology has a part to play in how we understand and engage with our customers. So from a business perspective, this can inform the platform that we develop our app on, to the features of that app, the payment methods we provide as part of the e-commerce experience. All of these things and many more besides are potentially opening up our business or potentially closing it off as well to certain customers or certain prospects. Now, with our last data type then, I want to take a little bit of a look at what for me is the all-encompassing data classification that joins all of the different data types that we've been discussing together so far. I'm talking specifically here about psychographic data. Now, before we get into some examples and explore psychographic data a little further, I want to point out that this type of data data focused around how customers live their lives, really contains a large number of intangible elements that can be difficult to capture, difficult to research. Now, because of that, this type of data is at more of a premium than our other data types that we've been talking about. And the methods of capturing this data, which surveys being the most popular of these, tend to be costlier and possibly open to influence through a variety of factors, such as things like the wording of the question, when the question's been asked, the location of where you're asked this question, all of these different things. But if we take a leap and say, well, actually, we're just going to assume for this webinar that our data that we're capturing is accurate, then we can start to actually utilize this data to explore different things. Things such as the different values and the different attitudes that customers have. What's important to them? Is it family? Is it community? Is it money? Is it success, for example? What are their opinions on certain things, or key social issues, or politics is another great example. What their interests are, what kind of movies they watch. Do they have pets? Do they have particular hobbies, indoors and outdoors? What activities do they enjoy? Musical instruments, sports, cooking. Like I said, the list goes on and on. So in a marketing context then, this allows us to really focus and customize our messaging and our value points based upon these beliefs and these life-influencing opinions. For example, if a brand has a large number of customers who are conscious of the ecological impact of their activities, showcasing how the brand are working towards, or better still, delivering their products through an ecologically sound and sustainable business model is going to resonate really, really well. Another example would be the often intangible choices that customers make around their favorite sports teams, their star players, their sort of musical icons, all of which we can use as marketers to influence and engage with the customer in question. Sounds really basic, but how many of us on today's webinar have not thought twice about making a purchase if it's endorsed, however subtly or however overtly, by a favorite musician or a favorite sports star, for example? What we're really seeing here is that customers are making purchases and other decisions primarily based on emotions and feelings. Personal endorsements and politics are two great examples of how emotion and tangible beliefs lead to people towards making decisions that can't necessarily be understood through breaking it down in a sort of a product-centric way. It's not going to help us to really understand the individual in question. So moving on then from types of data and really basic segmentation, we can start to look at a little bit, go a little bit more advanced and look at some basic segmentation models. So in this context, RFV or RFM segmentation modeling is probably the most common type of segmentation approach that's in use today. And like I said, it's an example of that next stage of our journey where we're starting to look at those more basic models using those multiple data types. So if we take RFV or RFM as a case in point, we can see that really, evaluating how recently a customer's carried out an activity, let's just say typically a purchase, for example, combining that with how frequently they conduct that activity, and then joining both of these data points with the monetary value of the customer's purchases to date, then we're able to really understand a number of things about the various cohorts of customers created by this particular model. These could be segments such as loyal customers, people who are buying the most often, for example. You might want to choose to treat them differently with different types of messaging, different types of offers, for example. You've got your react-to-date segment, customers who were great customers in the past but who have not purchased recently. You want to start winning them back, different types of offers and messaging tactics, for example. You've got your welcome group, obviously your newest customers, so maybe a little bit of education around the brand, a little bit of introducing them to your brand ambassadors, your influencers, for example. Your growth group, they're your faithful customers, they return regularly, but they've got a fairly low spend rate. So what tactics can you use there to start moving them up and increasing that spend rate as well? And then you're left with things like your devotees, your absolute best gold standard customers. They're the people that bought the most recently, they bought the most often, they generate the most revenue. So while these types of models are RFV and RFM, they're really important, they've also spawned lots of little offshoots as well. Things like recency, frequency, duration, RFD, or recency, frequency, engagement, RFE, which are more focused on things like web behaviors, how long a customer browses a website, how engaged they are with your blog content or with your other sort of marketing communications as well. But while these models like this are a great place to start, what it really does is it opens up a wider range of customer segmentation focused on the actual value of each individual customer. So if we just take broad sort of spectrum value-based segmentation here, this can take many forms. It could be monetary, it could be in terms of influence, it could be absolutely anything. But what we're really doing here is we're narrowing this down and we're centering how we're dividing up our customers as part of our segmentation approach based on their underlying financial value to the business. It could actually be based upon some of our RFV and RFM outputs, or it could just be actually taking a sum of all of the past purchase data, for example, to understand their total spend over their lifetime. In my experience, value-based segmentation typically leads to organizations devising and deploying a lifetime value or LTV framework that's used to categorize customers and inform their eligibility for offers, promotions, and other experiential rewards. But as we'll cover later on, though, the real interesting part of value-based segmentation comes into play when we start to combine segmentation approaches and add in additional data attributes to really narrow the segmentation further and increase that level of granularity. And this leads me on to the idea of status-based segmentation as well. In its absolute rawest form, it's extremely binary. We have two core groups. We have active customers who are purchasing from us, who are engaging with us. We have lapsed customers who used to buy and are now just walking off into the sunset. How we define each of those groups, again, will be down to our specific business and our specific vertical. But typically, it's based upon how often we expect a customer to make a purchase and whether they've made that repeat purchase or not. Just to build upon that, if we look at a couple of examples, the insurance organization may have a longer active time period for their customers because they only see their customers once a year when they purchase a policy, whereas a retail organization may work in shorter, potentially more seasonal sort of life cycles as well, depending upon the overall life cycle of their product and how people engage with their particular brand. But much like the value-based segmentation, status segmentation, again, really only adds additional value when we combine it with other segmentation approaches and data attributes as well. So when we take a moment here to think about shifting our focus back to that demographic data we started with, we want to start looking at how we can segment customers based upon things such as generation or life stage, and how this can really aid us in our quest for delivering that optimized customer experience. So by using our demographic data to determine age, therefore generation, we can start to identify customers who have shared similar life experiences, and in turn, how those shared life experiences and values and ideals, how they're actually going to inform the different potential outcomes that these particular customers could deliver for us as an organization. But if we follow that same train of thought, we can use those same key points and take this almost a step further to go from generational into life stage. We can start to understand people in more detail, separating this out. Are they going to university, for example? Are they about to become parents? Are they about to become parents for a second or third time? Have they just purchased their first house or their third house? They just bought their first car. They just bought their first international holiday. Are they potentially even looking to retire and move abroad? So in the same way that we can with generational segmentation, life stage segmentation enables us to really leverage those shared commonalities to inform the targeting and the specific details of our message. And it's exactly the same when we start to think about seasonal segmentation. And we're all aware of the seasonality of our lives as a whole, whether that's through our own business's seasonal peaks and troughs, or through our own acknowledgement and realization that we as individuals will only make purchases at certain times of year, for example. Seasonal segmentation really takes advantage of these behavioural patterns and then draws those links to the particular seasons, whether they're meteorological seasons or whether they're holiday seasons, whether they're things like Thanksgiving or Christmas or Hanukkah, for example. But segmentation doesn't just stop with the application of these models that we've been talking about here. The advances in AI and machine learning in recent years have really allowed marketers to be able to increase the depth of their segmentation efforts, reduce the time taken to build and iterate upon various segments, while being able to take their segmentation from being very, very broad brushed to becoming a lot more targeted and a lot more nuanced. And what these AI and machine learning advances have really done is speed up the segmentation process, and it increased the granularity and the actionability of that process as well. And it's the ability to do things such as quickly identify lookalikes of pre-existing segment members, for example, or uncover new segments through deep dive analysis. And understanding how this is actually moving marketing as an entire discipline, moving that forward. It's actually allowing brands to really converse with customers as humans. They're not just a sort of a caricatured, sort of broader segment persona, for example. It's about being able to form a genuine relationship with each person, not apply that broad brush treatment, and be able to be a lot more sort of targeted and personalised in the messaging. We could see that in the specifics of an upsell strategy, for example, the way that we communicate a new product launch or the debut of a new product line, for example. But saying that, as we've seen so far, there are many ways that we can segment our customers based upon the data that we hold upon them. But the examples that I've been talking about to this point, they're not the end of the road for segmentation. They're not hard and fast models that define the limitation of what can be achieved through your segmentation activities. The fact of the matter is that we're human. We're always looking to group things based upon their properties and their traits. And segmentation, much like splitting up Lego bricks, is exactly the same. So whether that's through simple things, dividing our customer base based on a single attribute, for example, they do or do not have this particular attribute. Whether we then start to look at how we combine attributes, either within a particular data type, like demographic data, for example, or across multiple data types. Whether we actually choose to grow this even further and start to employ those more nuanced models such as RFV or RFM, where various data types are then combined to increase the depth of our segmentation again. But it's then whether we take this a step further again as well, whether we're taking the outputs of those models, whether we're combining them across multiple models to dig deeper, or maybe we're including them in the baseline calculations or within the results of machine learning and AI-driven approaches, such as lookalike modeling, propensity modeling, or cluster segmentation, giving us that ability to become even more granular. And when we add in almost as an overarching element over the top of this, a healthy dose of our own empirical knowledge and ability to spot patterns, we're really able to get to a level of segmentation and insight that really was actually just fantasy a few years ago. And saying that, for me personally speaking, the real value of segmentation is that it's essentially an endless process of exploration, analysis, contribution of different data sets, and then using those different data sets in combination with one another, alongside all of our already built segments, to identify new patterns and groupings within our data and increase our understanding of our customer base. But no matter how deep and how advanced our segmentation becomes, there are 6 attributes we should always look to apply to our segments. The first is the fact that they need to be identifiable. We need to be able to actually identify the customers within each segment and actually measure their characteristics. The segments also need to be substantial. Not every organisation can afford to target people at the one-to-one level or utilise segments that might only have 10 members, for example. So there needs to be enough of a benefit in there from a business perspective to deliver a potential profit. The segments also need to be accessible as well. You should be able to engage with the people within that segment using the communication channels at your disposal. And on top of that, they also need to be stable as well. In order for our marketing efforts to be successful, the segment needs to be stable for a long enough period of time that we can strategically market it. We can't conduct life cycle marketing designed to be deployed over a 6-month period, for example, in the space of 6 hours. We also have to make sure that our segments are differentiable as well. We need to make sure that the people, or in the B2B context, the organizations within those particular segments, they should have similar needs that are clearly different from the needs of other people or other segments. For example, we don't want to be sort of hyper-segmenting to the point of oblivion. And finally, though, these segments need to be actionable. You need to be able to provide products or services to these segments as well. There's no point in uncovering segments unless you work in product development that you can't actually service. So by applying these 6 attributes, what we're really able to do is ensure that our efforts and our activities are relevant, but that we can also service those segments while still deriving that business benefit that we're all looking for. So as we've seen, segmentation relies upon a number of things, data being chief among them, but data alone isn't enough. As if the data isn't available in a unified and trustworthy form, then no matter how brilliant our segmentation strategy or our models may be, they're going to be inherently flawed. The good news is that if we're using a solution such as a CDP to solve the data unification issue, those same models and approaches are automatically going to be more accurate and reliable. Data unification, however, isn't the only element that needs to be solved when we're looking at segmentation tools as a whole. The ability to actually explore and manipulate and evaluate our data is also needed. But the key element here isn't just the ability to have all the data in one place and to be able to trust it, but it's about the skills that we need to access and work with that data. Just thinking broadly, are our marketing team able to actually write code against the database, for example? Do we have those skills? Do we have enough internal resource to upskill people in that area where that's not something they have at the moment? Or is it actually easier to find a tool that removes that technical barrier to entry, means that having to write code against the database is no longer needed? And it's this technical skills barrier to data usage that comes to the fore even more when we start to think about AI and machine learning. How many marketers do we have on our team that are skilled in statistical modeling? The answer is none. Do we have a budget to recruit a specialist into the team? Or are we able to pass this work to an external agency or to our BI or a data science team, for example, and then wait for the results? Or we're having a tool that marketers can use and makes modeling accessible without that technological barrier. Is that going to provide more benefit to us? So suffice to say, while it is definitely possible with smaller amounts of data to conduct segmentation in spreadsheets, but if you've got the specialist resource and the specialist tools, you can drive models through those tools using those skills and those teams. But does that really meet the need of the organization as a whole? What about the data management element? Can all of this be centralized in one place and actually drive efficiencies? And I believe with the CDP, absolutely it can. So before we end today's session then, I want to show the graph that we have on screen here. This actually came about as part of some work I've been doing with a number of our clients. We've been working on some outputs around the different segmentation approaches and their ease of deployment. It's probably not actually going to surprise you what you see here, in some respects. But when we look at this and break this down, we see that the approaches we covered earlier in the webinar, where we're using a single data type that's been around for a very long time, it's commonly accepted, they're delivering quite a low level of value, but they're also actually very, very easy to implement. So you tend to see every business does these things, demographic segmentation, behavioural segmentation, geographic segmentation, and where we've got the data, technographic segmentation. But as we move up the graph, we can really start to see how commonly used models, you hear those basic models with the orange cross there, they're really bringing out that first sort of step change in terms of the value being delivered without being massively complex to implement. But it is worth saying here that the complexity of these types of models, things like RFV and RFM, that can actually be a lot harder to implement or a lot easier to implement based upon the different technologies and skills that you have at your disposal as well. And that goes back to my previous point I made, just around the software piece. Where I saw a real second uplift in capability and performance was with the inclusion of those psychographic data sets as well, leveraging those emotional connections I spoke about earlier in isolation and in conjunction with the other approaches that we've just spoken about that are lower down the graph. The main challenge with psychographic data and its use is actually being able to capture that data, validate it, and be able to really understand it before actually looking to include it in any of your activities. And finally, based upon the conversations I've been having, it's the use of AI and machine learning-driven segmentation, while aspirational for a lot of businesses for a number of different reasons, predominantly actually to do with availability of data and the technical skills within the organization. This is where businesses are seeing the most value being delivered, but it's also the most complex thing to deploy. Like I said, you need the right data, you need a platform that you have the skills within your team to be able to operate, and you also need to understand the data and have that data in the right order to get the best out of these machine-driven approaches. So when we start to think about the best approach for each campaign, we need to think about our data, our capabilities, and our existing communication strategies, but do that alongside the value that each segment will bring when we're looking to actually optimize our activities. So in summary then, segmentation needs a number of things to deliver value. The first being that unified and trustworthy data foundation. But once you have that foundation, the sky really is the limit. You're not limited to a specific model or a specific approach. As long as you can actually access your data, you can start to really leverage your own empirical insight into that data to increase your understanding of your customer base. And while predictive analytics and machine learning, they're great in terms of being able to actually drive segmentation to the next level. It's about getting to the nth degree by employing those basic models, taking that AI and that machine learning, and then being able to combine all of that together to really push your segmentation absolutely as far as it goes. And on that note, Jen, I've noticed that we've got a little bit of time left. I've noticed we've had quite a few questions come in. So did we want to spend a little bit of time actually going through those questions for the rest of the session?
Hi, Matt. Yes, we've got 5 or so minutes left. Before we dive into questions, though, I did want to quickly talk about a series of lunch and learn virtual workshops that we're currently running. So these 2-hour sessions are designed for brands that are currently evaluating CDPs either now or early next year. And they're tailored to your requirements and offer industry-leading advice and practical tips for not just customer segmentation, which is obviously what we've spoken about today, but also creating that unified database that Matt was discussing earlier, and obviously all of the other great benefits that a CDP offers. We'll also organise sending over a pizza for the virtual session to try and give you that traditional lunch and learn feel as much as we can possibly do in today's world. So if that sounds of interest and you wanted to register, then all you need to do is head to bluevent.com/lunchlearn, and you can register your interest there, and someone will contact you. So I just wanted to quickly pop that in before we dived into the questions. Yeah, we have had a couple of questions through. If you haven't sent one in to us, there's still a bit of time, so just fire that over to us now and we'll try and get to it. So first up, Matt, how does a CDP help with segmentation? You talked a lot about the different models, but how do we actually put that into practice using a CDP?
That's actually a really great question, Jen. So I think the first point really to cover this at a very high level with the time we've got left is a CDP really helps in a number of ways. I mean, firstly, we're thinking about the creation and the maintenance of that reliable, trustworthy data foundation that I spoke about as part of the slides. Bringing all that data together. Also, providing you with data classification tools as well. Getting rid of a data dictionary sat next to you, the ability to actually build your own lifetime value models and your own lifetime value approaches, for example. The ability to customize things such as recency, frequency, value, dashboards, for example. And being able to do that within the solution as part of setup, etc., without being sort of limited in terms of how an organization will say, well, actually, your data has to fit this, you have to use these definitions, for example. But beyond that, it's also about having access to segmentation tools, whether they're things such as let's say things like Venn diagrams, pivot tables, for example, but it's about having them in ways that don't require you to be technically skilled, where you're not having to work with just Excel that's constantly crashing because you put really large data sets into it, for example, and being able to navigate through those segmentation tools in your data at a train of thought speed. But also it's about being able to have a user-friendly way of actually utilizing AI and machine learning without, as I said earlier on, without having to have those statistical knowledge, those skills, having to potentially rely on a BI team or an insights team, for example, as well. So there are lots of different ways, and some of them tend to be quite business specific, but that's kind of the broad part of this as well.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. And then also you talked about RFM RFE and RFD earlier on in the session, and someone's just asked if you can just repeat the meaning of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So what you've got is you've got recency, frequency, and monetary value. And RFM and RFV are the same thing. So it's recency, frequency, value, recency, frequency, monetary value. You've then got recency, frequency, engagement, which is the RFE. And you've got recency, frequency, and duration, which is the RFD. And the RFE and RFD are very much geared towards looking at how people are interacting with content. Whereas RFM and RFV tend to be more based around behaviours and tend to be more around looking at financial information as well in a lot of cases.
Awesome. And then last one for the final 5 minutes. What options do I have for deploying AI and machine learning without having a specialist tool or data science team?
Again, another really great question, but a lot of CDPs actually have AI and machine learning built in. And the idea of CDPs doing this is that they make it a lot more user-friendly. So there are examples, and it's in my head, it's always a trade-off, because you want to have something that's user-friendly, but you still want to have the ability to get at the specifics of the model as well. Initially, it's great having a button, so to speak, that just does it. But that means that the platform is less flexible potentially in other areas around the data side of things. So for me, personally speaking, it's about having the ability to use things like wizards, for example, to actually build those models. So it's taking all of the really, really technical things and making them a lot more user-friendly while still exposing the inner workings of what's going on. And by having that, it really removes the need for sort of data science teams, massively specialist tools, being specifically purchased for marketing. I mean, saying that though, a lot of the organizations I speak with as well, they do still have those kinds of tools, but they're more used more broadly across the business. A lot of the time it would be you'll have a data science function that would be very much around things like product forecasting or financial modeling, for example, and they get drafted in to help with marketing. But marketing always gets pushed to the bottom of the pile because it's kind of the nice to have rather than the must have. So in that case, we still tend to see organizations use the capabilities within the CDP to meet the needs of marketing. And then it works really nicely as complementary to the data science teams. Because if there are huge projects that need doing with data from all around the business, that's what the data science team will do. Whereas if it's just a propensity model to understand people's likelihood to purchase from a particular offer, the marketing team can self-serve their ability to deliver that as well without having to rely on that team and potentially wait and miss the opportunity for making those sales and leverage the insight that they're looking to gain from that model.
Perfect. Thanks very much for everyone who sent their questions in, and thanks very much, Matt, for presenting today. I think that brings us nicely to the end of the session with just a couple of minutes to spare. We hope you found the session beneficial today. If you have any further questions for us, then please feel free to email marketing@blueven.com and we'll be happy to help. If not, like I said, the Lunch and Learn session's still there if anyone fancies joining us for that. We've also got a ton of great resources at blueven.com under the resources tab. We've got loads of new ebooks. We've actually got a new research report that we released a couple of weeks ago that I highly recommend checking out. And if not, have a lovely day. Thanks very much for joining us again.
Thanks, everyone.